Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai was one of the top animes to come out during the fall 2018 season, and it did so by successfully bait and switching viewers into thinking it was just anime waifu eye candy before becoming a very emotionally and thematically driven story. Young high schooler Sakuta one day discovers a girl wearing a bunny outfit just walking around in a library unnoticed by anyone. The bunny girl Mai is a young actress that attends Sakuta's school, but transferred into it in the middle of the year when the cliques of the school were already established. She's been having an unusual problem lately where the people have suddenly stopped being able to acknowledge her existence. They can't see that she's there, and they suddenly lose their memories of her. Since Sakuta could still see her when other people can't, he tries to help her figure out what's happening to her. He believes it to be a case of what's known as puberty syndrome, where the emotional problems of someone experiencing puberty manifest themselves as a physical problem. And the show explores multiple cases of puberty syndrome with problems ranging from envying your siblings to cyberbullying. Despite being well received, it was actually a show that I almost dropped from the start. I went into this completely blind, and the first episode made me think it was a mystery romance story similar to Your Name. I thought Your Name was fine, but the problem I was having with Bunny Girl Senpai was it immediately started trying to make sense of the mystery that was going on. And usually when a mystery anime tries to explain things, it doesn't make sense, and I end up hating it for not only trying to reveal a magic trick to me, but also doing it wrong. A show like Steins Gate is one of the rare exceptions I've found of this, and that's why I absolutely love Steins Gate. The premise of sending yourself text messages from the future using a kitchen microwave sounds ridiculous, and you know it can't actually happen in reality, yet this show tries to give it a plausible reason, and does so in a way that seems a bit realistic, yet also vague enough to where you're never taken out of the story because of it. So when Sakuta approaches his science expert friend Futaba about the situation, and she started to explain it with the really shaky grasp of quantum physics, I was starting to get really turned off. It was already trying to explain a magic trick in a way that didn't make sense and only served to distract me from the story. And what also happens when shows do this, especially early on, is that you are now given arbitrary rules and you start noticing when the show actually breaks these rules all the time. Mai supposedly is outcast at school by all the other students just because she transferred in the middle of the school year. I could buy this if she wasn't literally established already as a popular young actress and people at the school were already aware of this. No way in hell do I buy that an attractive actress transfers into a school and no one cared because it's the middle of the school year. They all know she's a popular actress. How was it that day one she wasn't one of the most popular girls in the school just because she transferred into the school and was already a popular actress? And you might be shouting at your screen, they're ignoring her because of her puberty syndrome. But as it turns out, the students at the school are the literal last people who can acknowledge her existence. Everyone else loses their observation of Mai first, including her own fucking mother. And then at one point, another arbitrary rule about how falling asleep will make you lose your observation of Mai is introduced, even though it was just randomly happening to her before, and it doesn't make sense to create this rule out of nowhere now. Yet despite all this, I powered through, and eventually it finally clicked in my head why I was going about this show all wrong. I was trying to use logic to break down what was happening to Mai to the point where I was able to show that her problem was really a non-issue that made no sense. But the show was trying to tell me that it didn't care about her problem making sense, and that I shouldn't either. Let's take a step back so I can explain what's happening to Mai. She's a young actress that's been in the business since the age of 6. It was fun when she was starting out, but it eventually became stressful, and her mother only saw her as a way to make money. Her mother had even at one point forced her into doing a risky photo shoot against her wishes. So Mai started to dream of a world where nobody knew who she was, and then her puberty syndrome started kicking in. Why did it start happening? It's because she loves acting and feels it's a part of her, but all the stress and the problems with her mother lead her to start thinking about quitting. Her puberty syndrome happens as a result of her decision to stop acting and attend school instead. It's a physical manifestation of her biggest fear. If she's not acting, she could cease to exist. She wouldn't be relevant anymore and start fading away from everyone's memories. She believes people only care about her if she's an actress. Now that we understand her problem, let's think. What would you suggest to someone facing these problems in real life? You'd probably tell them if they just want to keep acting but not be exploited by her mother, that they should just find a new manager and move on. Well, that happens in the story, and yet the syndrome is still affecting her. In fact, getting worse. It was the obvious solution solution, given what really kickstarted her puberty syndrome, but it didn't work. Would you tell her she's being silly and to just talk it out with her mom? Well, that doesn't work because then her mom forgets her own daughter even exists. Alright, we're thinking too much about the family trouble part. Maybe if we just tell her we never forget about her, even if everyone else does, then it'll break the spell. No, we fall asleep, we forget, and our words meant nothing in the end. But we're close now. What cures her puberty syndrome isn't the obvious answer, isn't to dismiss her problems, and it isn't to make promises that we don't know if we can keep. What cures her is addressing her actual core problem, the problem that people only care about her just because of her acting. Sakuta remembers her because his experiences with her go so much deeper than the idea of Mai as just a popular actress. He remembers her because he cares deeply for her and runs to the school's baseball field to yell at the whole school that he loves her no matter what and doesn't care what anyone else thinks of her. And normally I would consider the use of a love conquers all resolution to be kind of cheap, but it made me realize here what this show was actually trying to say. It's not about what a person's temporary problem is. It's not about what's happening in reality. It's about how to approach helping someone going through an emotional problem that seems to have no solution. Have you ever had that one friend come up to talk to you about their relationship problems? You know, someone who's being constantly treated like shit and vents to you about it all the time. The obvious choice would be to tell them that their significant other is just an asshole and that they should just break up with them and move on. But that's always a lot easier said than done. If it were happening to you, you'd already know what the obvious answer to the problem is. You know this, and yet you'd still vent to your friend instead of doing the obvious solution. Why? Just to get it off your chest? To try and find alternative solutions? To have your opinion validated? Or is it really just a problem that seems emotionally unsolvable and you're just reaching out for someone to sympathize with you? When you go through life, you have tons of moments like those. You have a problem with a clear solution, but it either isn't as easy as it sounds or it doesn't address the root of the problem. If you have trouble finding a job and you start to feel useless, the obvious answer would be to keep searching until you find something, but you'll feel worse and more useless if you keep trying but keep getting rejected. Or maybe you have a dream of being successful in your field, but you're struggling to grow. The obvious answer is to practice and work harder, but maybe it turns out that was never the field you really wanted to succeed in the first place. And this happens most often during puberty, a time where hormonal changes mixed with mental and emotional growth create problems that others could solve or dismiss easily, but you just can't break through it yourself and you don't know why. It's a state of mind where you know you have a problem, but it feels unsolvable even when solutions are neatly laid out in front of you. It's a sense of hopelessness, where it feels like people are just shouting answers at you instead of sympathizing with your struggle. And I know that's a lot for me to extrapolate just from the first 3 episodes, because that is just the first 3 episodes, but the other arcs of the anime portray this as well. For example, soon after saving Mai, Sakuta discovers another girl experiencing puberty syndrome. This time it's Koga, a girl who can restart days in order to try and fix her mistakes, similar to the girl who leapt through time. At first, we're shown that she's restarting the day in an attempt to avoid a guy who will ask her out that day. She doesn't like him, but one of her friends has a big crush on the guy. But instead of just telling him no, the most obvious answer, she keeps looping the day in an attempt to avoid the event from ever happening. She does this instead of just rejecting him because she knows if she does this, then her friend will start to resent her, along with her entire friend group hating her and then her entire class ignoring her. She eventually succeeds at avoiding the event from happening, but it only works if Koga and Sakuta pretend to start dating. So instead of just rejecting a guy, she enters an entire fake relationship just to avoid the problem. Through this arc, we learn more about who Koga is as a person. She's the kind that stays up all night to get caught up on the latest memes so she isn't left behind in conversations. The kind of person who doesn't want to start problems with her friends despite how she actually feels. In short, she's the kind of girl who is dependent on others for acceptance and ignores her own wishes and feelings as a result. The pretend dates all go according to plan until the last day of their fake relationship approaches. Then the day starts looping again, meaning her puberty syndrome still hasn't been resolved. Despite pretending, Koga had developed actual feelings for Sakuta, but she knows that Sakuta has feelings for Mai. So again, she decided to start looping the day and avoid her problems rather than address her feelings. What cures her puberty syndrome? It isn't to loop the day until Sakuta also has feelings for her. It isn't to just reject the guy at the beginning. It's to finally communicate how she actually feels and what she wants in life rather than just go with the pack or avoid her problems entirely. After accepting that her own feelings and choices are valid, she finally loops them all the way back to the day when she was initially asked out. This time she properly rejects the guy who asked her out, but not because of her friend and not because of her feelings for Sakuta, but because she had grown to understand that she shouldn't let everyone else affect her when she expresses her feelings or makes a decision. She should just be honest with herself so she won't regret what she did later on. In this case, the most obvious answer of just reject the guy was a solution, but not to the real problem. When Sakuta initially tells Koga to just reject him, he's just dismissing the actual cause of her puberty syndrome, the unsolvable emotional problem that cannot be defeated with just logic, but with sympathy. Once she became self-dependent, the act of rejecting the guy was a lot easier since she was finally doing it without regrets. After all this time, she was free to be herself, and she couldn't have reached this point with telling her to just do it, or to use quantum physics to come up with rules to break. Probably the biggest evidence of my point is the arc where you meet Mai's sister Nodoka. In her story, Mai and her sister have swapped bodies, and now they have to try to pretend to be one another until they can resolve the puberty syndrome. Nodoka looks up to her sister, but is jealous of Mai's insane level of talent and fears that Mai looks down on her. What stood out the most to me about this arc was one scene where Mai calls Nodoka a child, but Sakuta says that means Mai is just having a huge argument with a child then, which is basically him saying, you're both being children, just make up already. But then Mai responds with, I don't want to hear sound logic. And you might dismiss this as a throwaway joke retort, but to me this is a character literally saying one of the main themes of the show. Mai knows that they should just make up, but their problems go a lot deeper than a couple arguments. Solving the temporary problem doesn't fix the actual issue, as we see time and time again with this show. When Kaede is cyberbullied and her puberty syndrome manifested as actual cuts and bruises, why doesn't she just get off the internet? Well, they tried that, and she lost her memories because the real issue was the emotional scarring it left behind, and how it made her lose a part of herself. When Futaba splits into two different Futabas, where one is what others want her to be while the other one feels unwanted, why doesn't she just let the popular Futaba take over? Well, because it isn't just about being wanted. She doesn't want to give up who she really is just to be accepted, even though she knows she easily could. None of these problems are easy to solve, despite how trivial their initial cause may be. So it really resonated with me the ways that this anime makes the viewer experience the emotional complexities that come with underlying issues. And it does this while also perfectly setting the mood with its nice visuals and amazing soundtrack, especially its opening song, which is absolutely perfect. I could have done with less quantum physics explanations and this show trying to market itself as Mai being a bunny girl even though she only wears the outfit twice in the entire goddamn series, but oh well. That being said, I can't really blame you if you dropped the show early because of how it kept trying to explain things poorly. It happens less often as the story continues and eventually just stops happening altogether, which I'm really glad for. The show's themes, tones, visuals, and music shine bright and make for a fantastic anime overall. That's the end of my literal 4-page analysis of Bunny Girl Senpai. Donate to me on Patreon for $1 a month for more anime rants, but it won't solve the real problem of my wife leaving me. Please come back, Sharon. I can change, I swear. They're my kids too. You can't do this to me.
Since I was a young man, I've had this plan to stay in Japan as some type of ninja picture, living like a Christian scripture, differ, thinking bigger, baptized in Savannah River, living in a vegetable pit.